Okay, so for today's video, I decided to put in my other ears that I showed on stream that one time. And it's like, ooh, these are my spooky ears. It's lazy Halloween. But they look so jarring. What the fuck is happening? I already have them in my head, so I'm committed. But like, I don't know if I'll be doing this all Halloween. I'm not gonna lie. Welcome back to Lazy Halloween, and this is the Wheel of Fear. Come one, come all, spin the wheel and find your deepest, darkest fears. Because as they say, the wheel never lies, but politicians do. And the only fear-mongering that I'm going to be taking seriously is from the Wheel of Fear. Let's give this thing a spin and see what it gives us. Yeet. Ooh, I'm so excited. You know, it's probably gonna give me something generic like spiders or the dark, even though I'm not inherently afraid of either of those things. Parents. Okay, y'all didn't have to call out my daddy issues like that. This is uncalled for. Welcome back to the Lazy Bedhead channel, and this is my favorite segment of the channel that I like to call Lazy Randomly Talks About Video Games for No Reason. I'm a lazy bedhead, and yeah, I guess you could say I'm a gamer girl. I mean, have you guys even watched those streams of me playing Supermarket Simulator? I'm on that fucking grind. But before we begin, first, an apology. I haven't been here for the first 2 weeks of Lazy Halloween because I was too busy conquering my biggest fear. Ohio. And then I got a head cold like right after, so that was fun. So to make up for my absence, I will be extending the Halloween season all the way up to November because Thanksgiving is a colonizer's holiday, and the only thing that I'll be thankful for is your generous support for the channel. Yay!
Funding for the Lazy Bedhead channel was provided by viewers like you. Thank you.
Notice something interesting when it comes to the content that I make on this channel, and I'm sure that y'all have seen it too, but particularly when I make gaming related content, it seems to be watched by like a lot of you. And because of that, I need to capitalize on the success. And considering we just streamed Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit, that should be the first thing we talk about. And we will, just not today. Because today, I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about a smaller indie horror game that's been making its way around the Let's Play community. And I think it deserves an in-depth look through, and it deserves a lot more attention than I think these YouTubers are giving it. Because, in my opinion, this game is one of the darkest in indie horror, and it's a game that explores a different type of horror that is revealed in a very clever way that I want to share with you today. So on today's episode of Lazy Plays a Video Game That Makes Her Cry a Lot, let's talk about bad parenting. Bad Parenting is an itch.io game free to download on itch and Steam. The story follows a young boy named Ron living with his two parents who tell him the story of Mr. Redface, the main monster and antagonist of the game. You play as Ron as he follows the instructions of this doll that ominously looks a lot like him, and he oddly doesn't question that at all, as you travel through an alternative world to save your family from Mr. Redface. The team behind Bad Parenting, 2000 2002 Studios released the game on itch on August 15th of this year, and it's one of their first video game projects to be released. Although the simplicity of the game is very apparent as it's self-described as a walking simulator, the game has a lot to offer in terms of its story that it's trying to tell. And this is only chapter 1 of the 2 chapters planned to be created and released. Since the publication of the first installment, the ratings have been overwhelmingly positive, and the community that has sprouted uplifts this game with numerous fan art pieces, fan-assisted translation for the game to be more accessible to a bunch of new players, and large gaming content creators like Queso, Thaf9, and Cub Scouts releasing their full walkthroughs of the game. There's a lot of symbolism and small hidden details of the game that I want to talk about today, because I think this game, for a first-time development project, is incredibly well done. And I think the themes and the story beats of this experience perfectly explores a fear that doesn't get touched on too often in horror games, and that being the harsh realities that ruin our childhoods. Bad Parenting opens with this title scream, reminiscent of the itch.io games made by 616 Games, with the game cover on the main screen as if looking at a CD cover of a physical game copy. The game's beginning sequence is very reminiscent of an old 50s cartoon with graphics to replicate a PS1 game. This is story 1 of 2 games, and our first story is called Mr. Redface. Our mother comes through the ominously slow opening door and is home late from work on our birthday.
Mom, you're home late.
Come on, I was busy with work. Can you have some sympathy for me?
But today is my birthday.
Oh, of course. I know that.
Then where's my gift?
It's after this that Mom tells us the story of Mr. Redface. On the birthday of good children, Mr. Redface secretly leaves gifts while they are asleep. This beginning conversation lets us know that we, the player, are this lady's son, and our mom is so overwhelmed with her job that she forgot it was our birthday. So, in order to cover up the fact that she forgot, she makes up a story about Mr. Redface. She sends you to bed anticipating the arrival of Mr. Redface to bring you a birthday present, but not before we meet this man.
You're fooling the kid again. How many times have you come home this late?
I was working. My shift ended late.
Bullshit, you think I'm an idiot, don't you? Hey, little shit, get back to your room. Don't stay in there eavesdropping on grown-up conversations.
So this lovely human being is our dad. And our dad doesn't seem to respect us at all. Or our mother, for that matter. Cursing at our mom, calling her story bullshit, and calling his own son a little shit. It is obvious that this home isn't exactly a happy and healthy family. Rather one that is full of conflict and tension, and we'll explore more of those telltale signs in just a moment. For now, we head off to our room, the inside of our home being dark, with only the lights in the house illuminating certain hallways. Otherwise, the look of our environment is very green and dingy, but not like unkept, just kind of older looking and perhaps outdated in its design. Going into our parents' room, you can notice a small detail that gives us a glimpse into what this family dynamic is like. Mom and dad seemingly have separate beds, indicating that they don't sleep in the same bed as the average married couple would. And given how dad spoke to mom earlier, it's fair to say that they don't really get along. Our bedroom is very dark, with not a lot of lighting, and we sleep on a mattress on the floor, not an actual bed unlike our parents. This could be a clue into our financial situation or how mom and dad treats the son, but again, it's merely just a small detail. As we head off to sleep, a crack of lightning and the thumping of footsteps awaken us, and suddenly, a man opens our bedroom door and stands darkened by the light in the hallway. And it's here where I would like to talk about a trend in horror games that I've been noticing a lot more lately that pisses me off. This October, we have been blessed with seeing a lot of video game remasters and remakes of horror games with a large community fan base. Some of these games make sense to update with better graphics and gameplay, such as Silent Hill 2. The second Silent Hill game is regarded as the best narrative horror game released by Konami, and probably considered to be the best horror game experience of all time. But for many, it's very hard to get into the Silent Hill franchise due to the graphical capabilities of the time, making the game look like this, the dialogue sounding like this.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost? You're not my mama? It's you!
And the gameplay being very stiff and slow for new players. Remastering Silent Hill makes sense as the graphical design and capabilities of today translates incredibly well for a 23-year-old game. It remains faithful to the original, and it updates a lot of the gameplay mechanics that makes the game a lot more accessible and enjoyable for new players. The characters are still as intriguing and interesting as they were well over 20 years ago. And the monsters just look fucking awesome. Look at this thing! Though I am excited for the remake of the original Silent Hill 2, I do see a lot of concerns for its newer, updated graphics looking too smooth and soft. This takes away from the gritty atmosphere that the original had. The graphics of the original were, well, limited, yes, but for 2001, these cutscenes alone were incredibly ahead of its time. They still look great, even into modern day. It just feels like giving it a fresh coat of paint with these newer gen graphics is done solely to make the game quote-unquote look better, when it didn't need to have an upgraded look. The older graphic design actually works incredibly well for the atmosphere and horror of the original. And although I agree to this, there are still a lot of things like gameplay-wise that made it really hard for even me to get into when I first played Silent Hill 2 back in 2019, that I don't actually mind an updated look to it and its gameplay. But you know what game has done the fresh coat of graphical paint that I don't really like? Until Dawn. Until Dawn has released a remastered for the PlayStation 5 where they changed some story elements and overhauled the graphics. And although I think some of this overhaul looks like okay, some of it looks so fucking bad. Not to mention they replaced the entire track list of the original game. Like, what the hell are y'all doing right now? At least if I spend $60 to $70 on the Silent Hill remake, I'm getting a brand new game experience. If you spend $70 on this, you're getting the same game, but somehow worse looking graphics and a worse soundtrack. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? All of this to say that even if you have the best new gen graphics, that doesn't mean that your game is necessarily gonna be better or scarier. Just because shit looks more detailed and graphically accurate to real life and exists in that uncanny valley zone, that doesn't mean that your game is gonna look good. And the only reason I bring this up anyways is because this game intentionally is made to have lower graphics. It's made to look like a PS1, and graphically the game is far scarier than any new age games that I've ever seen. Like, this guy has barely any visual features, and yet this is the scariest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I think the reason why I am more scared of this and not this is because Bad Parenting has better art direction. Bad Parenting is not meant to be a visually impressive feat in graphical media. It's meant to give you a simple visual experience to tell a deeper story. The story is what matters more than the visual appeal. Although I'm not saying by any means that this game looks bad, I'm just saying that the game doesn't have to win me over by looking graphically better. It's just gotta be effective with its narrative. Case in point, oh my god, this thing is terrifying. So the No Graphics Man gives us a doll that looks exactly like us, and also shares the same name as us, and also talks. And normally, in horror case scenarios like this, where a doll is essentially just a little version of ourselves, that means that bad things are going to happen. And they will, just not the way you would expect. Also, important notes about this doll to keep in mind. The weird red-faced man intentionally puts the doll in the closet before it ends up in the middle of our room the next morning. Also, Ron points out that the doll's head is slightly slumped to the side, and it remains that way throughout the whole game. And I can't tell you why these details are important right now, but just know that the closet will be important. The doll introduces itself as Ron, and it's able to speak due to being created by magic via some master that he refers to. The doll proves its magical properties by providing Ron with a spaghetti plate that constantly regenerates and drinking a fancy wine, which honestly sounds like a good time. You know, I feel like most modern, horror dolls, they fail to lure their victims into a false sense of security. For example, I look at Annabelle, right? And without knowing that she's possessed by a demon, I could easily assume that she's possessed by a demon. Honestly, if Chucky wanted to earn my trust and just kill me off, at least take me out to dinner first. Especially if it's an Italian dinner. At that point, you might as well just ask me to lie on the floor and let me get sacrificed, because at that point, I am fully compliant.
What do you want to tell Joe Biden right now?
What's up, baby? Take me out to dinner.
Hey, yo!
Anyways, so the doll attempts to get Ron to go into his closet to retrieve more toys to play with, but the closet is locked. This'll be important to later, so be remembered to put it in your brain. Going into the kitchen, there's a few things of note here. For one, there's what appears to be a wine or beer bottle solely sitting on the table, and a note from our mom that reads, "You're reading this letter at 1 p.m., aren't you, sleepyhead? I've prepared your favorite dish in the fridge, so remember to heat it up before eating. Lately, I've noticed that you've been getting lazy about eating. You know I don't have much time at home, so please learn to take care of yourself and stop making me worry. One more thing, don't forget to take your medicine after eating." This note tells us that, at the very least, our mother isn't completely neglectful. I mean, sure, she comes home late and she forgets about our birthday, but at the very least, she does make us food to reheat so that we remember to eat. I've also noticed that the letter gives us an estimated time of 1 p.m., as in 1 in the afternoon, and I don't think that this is a typo. I think this is intentional. My theory is that, perhaps being a child of neglectful parents, Ron intentionally sleeps in this late to avoid being around his dad whilst his mother is out working or doing something. But this is all based on theory and speculation. During this sequence, something very interesting happens. As the Ron doll is drinking the bottle, he slams it on the table 3 times before this happens. The bottle shatters as Ron proclaims, "Oh no, my dad is going to whip my ass." Now, I know kids say the darnest things sometimes, but I think that if any child were to say, "My parents are going to whip my ass," I think that says a lot. Ron the doll reveals in this moment that his master has already taken care of Ron's dad. After searching the whole house, Ron realizes that he's home alone without his dad and begs the doll to bring his father back. I mean, sure, he just said how his dad is gonna whip his ass, and the doll also points out how he does, in fact, hits and yells at you, but Ron swears up and down that he's not a bad person. Are you sure about that? So Ron enters into this strange alternative world through his parents' closet, where Ron ends up in this weird forest world with this cat that looks like that masked lesbian cat from Courage the Cowardly Dog. This cat acts as a sort of secretary for bad parents that get taken away by the master. Through this conversation, we learn that our dad's name is Bruce, and since he's described as getting angry with Ron a lot, he's classified as a bad Bruce to distinguish between all the other Bruces in this weird alternative world, apparently. Besides from the cat secretary, we also meet these 3 kids next to this fire pit. Just like ourselves, these kids are also looking for their parents who were taken by the master. However, these kids don't appear to be in much hurry to find their families, as they are, quote, staying here for a bit. Ron enters a white opening in the forest to find where his dad has been kept. He's traumatized, shaking, and asking for the punishment to stop. The room is incomplete, with a white and gray checkered all over the room and the furniture blending into the walls and ceiling, hypothetically creating a space instead of it being a real space to distinguish. Ron finds a spell next to his father's bed, and in that moment, he's taken by a big green hand, awakening in the real world. We are still sitting in our parents' closet, where we see our mom do this for some reason, and she asks why the hell we're hiding in the closet. Our mom is an ally, let me tell you. She wants that closet to be transparent as fuck. We tell our mom that Mr. Redface took our dad, to which she replies with relief.
Well, that's a good thing then.
I'm not joking. It's a long story. Let me explain.
How is your doll Ron doing today? Is it alright?
The doll? Mom, how do you know about that?
Of course I know, since you haven't taken your medicine today. This isn't the first time you've had hallucinations. Every time you tell a different story. But the common factor is that stupid doll. Don't you remember the previous times?
This is starting to get very confusing. If all of this has been a hallucination, then why is Mom confirming that Mr. Redface did take our dad away? I mean, if this was all a hallucination, then Dad should still be here, shouldn't he? Also, the medicine she told us to take in that note was for hallucinations, which would explain everything, but then why does she confirm all of Ron's delusions anyways? Like, she tells Ron about Mr. Redface, and then he starts immediately hallucinating Mr. Redface. Also, her saying that the doll is a repeated hallucination seems like a cop-out when Mr. Redface was the one that gave Ron the doll in the first place. And she's already confirming that Mr. Redface taking Dad away was a good thing, but if these are all just hallucinations, then where is our dad? How does she know about this doll and yet not know that the way the doll was presented in these hallucinations was through a creature that she made up the night before? Regardless, we are sent to bed. Seeing Ron the doll levitating in the room, we are then attacked by the hallucinations of Mr. Redface. Mom finds us unconscious and takes care of us in her bed after blacking out. Honestly, after having this very intense visual hallucination, the last thing I want to see when I wake up is this face at the end of my bed. Mom promises to take the day off work to take care of us, but as soon as we wake up the next day, she's gone. Which Ron doesn't seem too shocked by, as it seems that she constantly breaks her promises. We find Ron the doll in our room, bandaged and beaten, revealing that his master beat him for taking Ron to see his dad. The doll also revealed that Ron's mom was taken away by the master as well. And it's here where we need to ponder on something. If the doll's master is Mr. Redface and he only takes parents who are mean and hits and yells at their kids, why did Ron's mom get taken? Ron's mother, by all metrics, isn't the best parent in the world, but she's not the worst. Sure, she works a lot more than she cares to be with her son, but by the end of the day, she doesn't call her son a little shit and beats the shit out of him, so really being an absent parent is almost preferred in this case scenario. And yet Ron is still determined to get his dad back regardless. Maybe it's a sense of being naive or wanting to be helpful in some way, but given that Ron is a child, it would make sense wanting to have that close bond with both parents, regardless of what the actual situation is. To try and fulfill both of their emotional needs rather than his own. The doll warns Ron that Mr. Redface will take him too if he doesn't leave, and Ron is adamant in getting both of his parents back. He shows the doll the spell that he found, and it's revealed as the spell to defeat Mr. Redface. Ron has to get the spell to his mom in order to finally get his parents back. Through the closet doors, we go into the creepy closet forest, where we see the same kids as before, hiding behind a car. An opening in the distance reveals a woman sitting at a table. Unlike with our dad, we are unable to enter into this space to talk to our mother. We throw the spell and we hide behind the car, almost like this little piece of paper is being treated like some sort of pipe bomb. Oh, it actually might have been a pipe bomb. Once Mr. Redface is blasted with green, Ron returns to the real world to see that the doll is disappearing. But at the very least, he got both of his parents back, so all's well that ends well.
You've been having an affair, haven't you?
I told you I was busy with work.
Liar! You neglected this family for another man. Aren't you ashamed to lie to your son?
And what about you? Do you think you're better than me? You're just at home leeching off me all year round. What kind of father are you? No matter what I do, it's my business. I still bring home money to support my child. And if you think I'm a whore, you're lowering yourself even below that.
One more word.
Fine. You and I will get a divorce. One of us will have to move out of the house, and if you're still here tomorrow, I'll take my son and leave.
You stay right there.
It didn't fix anything. Regardless of Ron's efforts, risking his own safety to confront Mr. Redface to get both of his parents back, it didn't matter. His mom still left the house. She was gone. Our dad slumps over the table with the bottle of beer in his hand, slamming it in a similar manner as Ron the doll had done earlier. And in his fit of drinking and anger, he becomes this. So if you're not picking up what's been so obviously been put down already, Mr. Redface represents the monster that Bruce becomes when he drinks. Mr. Redface beating the doll and being referred to as its master is an eerie representation of what Bruce does to Ron. The reason why the doll knew about the abuse is because the symbiotic relationship between the doll and Mr. Redface is a parallel. Obviously, when people are haggard like this due to excessive drinking, their face could become flushed due to an alcohol flush reaction from the blood vessels in the face. Mr. Redface is our dad, and what he does next is the most horrific thing to be brought to indie horror. Everything about this scene is perfect, and everything that happens before it has hinted that this was always going to be the final conclusion. Bruce kills his own son. And when I say that this scene is perfect, I mean like on a cinematic level and on a respect level. It does everything right. Bruce takes his son, his cries, so eerie and very lifelike in comparison to most voice acting in other indie horror games. As he slowly raises Ron up, it flickers between the reality and the fantasy of Mr. Redface and Ron the doll. And it makes sense why Ron is represented here as a doll, because in this moment, holding Ron up like this, Bruce sees Ron as something to play with. Something to break. Rather than his own flesh and blood, he sees him as an object small enough to hurt. And as Ron is murdered, everything stops. All the noise, all the flickering imagery just stops as we witness this horrific truth in complete silence. Now, in horror, the trope of the main character being dead the whole time is sort of overdone, but I think it works effectively here because of the character we play as. Ron is an innocent child that comes from a neglectful family, and yet despite how his family is, he still has that innocence to assume the best of them, as they are the only family that Ron knows. He knows his dad treats him pretty poorly, but through that childhood innocence and trust in the only parental figure that he has, he still has faith that saving him means that he can keep his family together. Saving his mom means that maybe she'll work less. Maybe she'll stay home more and take care of Ron instead of leaving notes for Ron to take care of himself. But in the end, that hopeful innocence of a child is broken with the harsh reality that he's been dead the whole time. And the parents who he loves and trusted most to take care of him, were the reason why he's no longer here. And that's what makes this so effective. It's one thing to be a character who's revealed to be dead all along, but it's another to be rooting for the good nature and will of this kid to save his dad in the hopes that maybe saving him will make his dad reconsider his behavior. But that's not the case. Having to confront that as a kid, that the people that you love and trust as your family would treat you this way and bring harm to you, is really tear-jerking and powerful.
No, this cannot be true. I'm very sorry, Ron. Your closet. I think you're able to open it now.
Finally being able to access the closet, as it has been locked the entire game. And this is what we see. It's Ron, mangled and rotted.
Why don't I know any of this? You've always known. Because I am the knowing part of you. You've tried to deny and reject these things and made up stories to make yourself feel better about you and your dad. And me, I have to find a way to lead you back to reality. I've tried many times. Many ways to help you accept this truth as easily as possible. And every time I fail, guess what happens? Tick, tock, boom. Your memory resets back to the starting point, which is the night your dad murdered you.
The doll has been the anchor to reality. It's been trying to tell us this the whole time. And I mean, it does make sense. A child oftentimes, when faced with abuse, will grow up to justify it in any way they can. Ron made up the stories of Mr. Redface to differentiate between who his dad is and who he really was the whole time. It's justifying his behavior by creating this alter ego of Mr. Redface. No, my dad couldn't have been abusive. It was when he drinks, he turns into Mr. Redface. It's Mr. Redface's fault. So then why doesn't his dad stop drinking to stop Mr. Redface? It's because Mr. Redface and Bruce are indistinguishable characters, and the doll isn't just presenting Ron with the reality of his death, but the reality that Mr. Redface and his dad are the same person. Holding his father accountable for his death means that he can't separate the two anymore. The doll tells us that we've been dead for 14 days. After Ron was murdered, his dad hid out in a cheap motel, which seems to be the incomplete room that Bruce was in before, which makes sense as to why it's left relatively ambiguous because Ron has never seen this motel room. Ron talking to his dad in this alternative world, trying to bring his dad home, is reimagined in this next sequence, where Bruce is being haunted by the corpse of his dead son. And as for our mom, she went to the police, having no clue where her husband is. No idea how this could have happened. She was so close to getting Ron and herself away from her husband, but it was too late. Except a slip of paper being their only hope. From this alternative reality, the spell that defeats Mr. Redface is evidence as to where Bruce is. It's a motel business card. Ron solves his own murder, and from beyond the grave, gives his mom a clue. The final sequence of the game shows the father being arrested and Ron being laid to rest with his mother mourning her son. Ron, watching his mother, is ushered over by the children from before. Now knowing that Ron is dead, we can assume that all of these children are also in the same situation as Ron, coping with their own deaths at the hands of their own Mr. Redfaces. And we get some clues as to what happened to all of them. Eerily, one of the children is waving to us from the confines of a ditch. Another is sitting directly in the fire pit, and the other one is stuck in the trunk of this car. And then there's Ron, spending his afterlife sitting in a closet with the rest of his newfound dead friends. And that's it. The end. So that was definitely more heavy than it was scary, but I still think this game has some great horror moments and a great story that explores something that I don't see get touched on in horror. And now that we've gone over the entire game, I can finally explain what I mean by this. The 5 Stages of Grief is a model proposed by psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who created this model in order to understand how we cope through the loss of something. And although this concept has been depicted in horror media before, Bad Parenting, I think, does it the best. Mainly because having to go through this grief is scary. Losing something familiar is scary, and accepting that nothing will go back to the way things were is a terrifying thought. And a big focus of these 5 stages that gets highlighted most of all is acceptance. Sure, Ron does bargain with the doll to get his parents back, and sure, he's been in complete denial of his death for 14 days, but Ron doesn't get angry or depressed. But he also doesn't outright accept it either. Having to accept what his father did meant having to face a very scary reality that unfortunately happens to kids all the time. Every child deserves a parent, but not every parent deserves a child. And having to understand that concept that young is scary because it reveals a fundamental flaw that breaks the innocence of what a childhood is and isn't for a lot of people. But that's, again, having to accept the harsh reality that not every kid gets to have it as good. Sometimes they're murdered by their parents, and accepting that the world you live in can really be that terrible sometimes is scary when terrible shit happens every single day. Because when terrible shit happens, it feels like whenever you read something in the news, like a natural disaster happens or a mass casualty event, it just feels like every day you read a horror news story, it's living a personal horror movie every day. Especially given the way that it feels like reading the news currently is like reading a creepypasta. Like, there's no way that some of this shit is actually happening in the world we live in. Oh, that's interesting. So, the Supreme Court of Texas ruled that an abortion will not be performed even at the risk of the mother's life. Well, geez, no wonder pregnancy horror is so popular now. But even with all of the horrid things that come from our society, there's always that one glimmer of hope. Even if she wasn't perfect, Ron's mother was and is the hope that kept Ron going. Sure, there's a lot of things that she could have done and should have done to prevent all of this from happening, but she did try. She no longer feared her abusive husband. She shook off that fear and accepted the reality of her relationship being unhealthy for both herself and her son. So she tried to leave. She tried to save her family. It's just a shame that it had to come to this. But it's not like she waited for Ron to be murdered for her to finally do something. She already intended on doing something. It's just that her husband wanted to punish her through the death of their son. Because Bruce is a coward who ultimately was the one who could have prevented all of this. Say what you want about Ron's mother, but Bruce was the one with severe alcoholism and a problem with his anger. And if he had confronted that problem at all, his wife would have never even considered getting a divorce to begin with. He's the one who killed his own son and treated him like less than nothing, just to get back at his wife. We've seen it before that he's perfectly capable of enacting violence on his wife, but killing his son is easier because that's less likely of a chance of Ron fighting back. Inebriated or not, Bruce did all of this. He's been displaying abusive behavior towards his wife and son for years. And so, this was just the obvious conclusion. And accepting that patterns of behavior and this supposed butterfly effect could have resulted in the death of this kid is scary. What if she stayed that night? What if she never threatened divorce? What if Bruce never drank that night? What if Ron went with his mom in the moment that she left instead of being left behind? The real horror here is the fact that all of this could have been avoided if certain choices weren't made. And accepting the path that led up to this preventable and extreme conclusion is scary. And that is why I think that this is one of the best indie horror games to come out this year. From a gameplay standpoint, it is pretty basic, but from a storytelling and cinematic standpoint, everything from the animations to the characters, to the design of the monster looking so similar to the real antagonist, but looking different enough to deceive the player. All of which is extremely well done and worth the playthrough. I know it feels like I went through the whole game anyways, but there's also a lot of extra stuff that I didn't even really talk about that makes this a game that I highly recommend, at least experiencing once. This is also the first game made by this team, and we love supporting indie artists and their first time projects, so just experiencing their artistic efforts is always worth it. And that's it for me. Thank you once again to my $5 Dreamy Patreon supporters. If you support me on Patreon, you'll get early access to scripts, videos, extra podcasting content, and a drawn EP character. So special thank you to Vetra Vakarian, Meekwood, Moomin, Red Blaze 27, Reginald Rensington, Late Mate, Demibird Does, Jack the Bro, Carbon IML, Alder Garaby, Fandom the Ho, Mellow Milo, John X Woodcat, Walls X Migraine, L Peace, Magnolia, Sky, the Ooh-wooing one, Ethan, Bacon Pierogi, The Lorelock, Seraphim, Amber Lay, John Fannin, The Piper at Dawn, Jordan Ogle, Mamiko Megame, Noctisketch, Grimmy, Average Citrus User, Gambler, Bob, Jellyfish Princess, Fun Stuffies, Springlock Grave, Trippy, Rudy Jazz, Johnny Boy, Rice Maddie, Pastel UFOs, and Gwendolyn Von Holt. Thank you all so much for watching. Go support the game. The itch.io and Steam links will be in the description. And here's to another lazy Halloween. It's gonna be 2 months of spooky fun like this. So stay tuned and I will see you all next time.